The world of ancient prophecy is a labyrinth, often overshadowed by the more familiar texts we recognize today. Yet, buried beneath layers of history stand figures whose words once commanded immense power and awe. Their prophecies, whispered through centuries, shaped empires and instilled both hope and dread. These were not just random pronouncements, but meticulously crafted oracular statements revered by emperors and commoners alike. They weren't always easy to understand, filled with riddles and visions that demanded interpretation. What truly lay at the heart of their influence, and why did their voices resonate so profoundly across such diverse cultures? Join us as we embark on a journey to uncover the mysterious Sibylline oracles, exploring their origins, their impact, and the controversies that continue to surround them. We'll peel back the layers of time to reveal the true power behind these ancient predictions. Imagine a world where powerful women, touched by divine madness, spoke visions that determined the fate of nations. These were the Sibyls, ancient prophetesses whose voices echoed from caves and sacred groves. Their words were believed to come directly from the gods, often delivered in a frenzied, trance-like state. They weren't just fortune tellers. They were instruments of cosmic will, their utterances shaping policy and inspiring religious devotion. Kings and emperors sought their counsel, believing that a single prophecy could avert disaster or secure victory. The very landscape of the ancient world was marked by their presence. But who were these women, really? And what made their prophecies so compelling that their legacy endured for millennia? Their story is far more complex than simple folklore, intertwining with the political and spiritual fabric of the world they inhabited. The origins of these prophetic voices and how their pronouncements gained such widespread authority will lead us into the intriguing tale of the Lost Roman Collection. The very concept of a lost Roman collection conjures images of ancient secrets and forgotten wisdom. For centuries, the Romans carefully guarded a sacred compilation of Sibylline prophecies. These were not just randomly collected scrolls, they were meticulously preserved and consulted during times of national crisis. Imagine the gravitas of these moments. A nation gripped by famine, plague, or war, turning to the musty pages, searching for divine guidance. The custodians of these books held immense power, dictating when and how the prophecies would be interpreted. It was a national treasure, deemed too important to be left to chance. And real quick, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more videos. Now let's get started. This collection wasn't always static. It evolved, with new prophecies added and older ones sometimes reinterpreted. Its existence profoundly influenced Roman decision-making, shaping military campaigns and religious festivals. But what happened to this invaluable repository of ancient wisdom? The fate of the Roman collection is deeply intertwined with the broader history of the Sibylline oracles themselves, especially when we consider how Jewish voices began to find expression within this pagan tradition. It seems almost contradictory, Jewish thought expressed through the mouth of a pagan prophetess. Yet, this is precisely what occurred within the Sibylline oracles. As the oracles gained cultural currency, Jewish authors began to appropriate this established prophetic form. They wove their own monotheistic beliefs, historical narratives, and messianic expectations into the existing Sibylline framework. This was not a random act, but a deliberate strategy to reach a wider, non-Jewish audience. The familiar voice of the Sibyl became a vehicle for revolutionary monotheistic ideas. Imagine the impact. A revered pagan oracle suddenly speaking of a single God, of judgment, and of a coming redemption that mirrored Jewish eschatology. It was a clever, perhaps even audacious, act of cultural transplantation. These Jewish contributions radically reshaped the character of the oracles. This fascinating blend of cultures set the stage for even more profound transformations, particularly when Christian scribes began to leave their indelible mark on these ancient texts, which we'll explore in Christian red ink on pagan pages. Just as Jewish authors adopted Sibylline prophecy, early Christians saw the potential in these revered texts. They recognized the authority the Sibyls commanded and began to insert their own messages, often directly modifying existing passages. It was a bold move, turning pagan prophecy into a tool for Christian evangelism. Imagine pagan converts encountering Sibylline oracles that, to their astonishment, seemed to foretell the coming of Christ, his crucifixion, and his return. This wasn't subtle. It was often an explicit reinterpretation or even outright interpolation of the original material. The red ink of Christian thought bled onto older pagan leaves. These Christian interpolations weren't always seamless. Sometimes the shifts in theology or focus were jarring, creating composite prophecies that blend vastly different worldviews. This layering of interpretations makes unraveling the original intent a complex historical puzzle. The question then becomes, were these Christian additions genuine interpretations, creative adaptations, or outright fabrications? This leads us directly to the crucial debate: forgery, fusion, or fulfillment. The debate surrounding the Sibylline oracles is fierce. Were these later additions genuine prophecies interpreted anew, a creative fusion of traditions, or simply outright forgeries? Each perspective holds significant implications for how we understand these texts. Some argue for fulfillment, suggesting that the Sibyls, divinely inspired, genuinely foresaw events that later aligned with Jewish or Christian narratives. From this view, the later additions merely clarify or expand upon pre-existing, albeit less explicit, truths. It lends an air of ancient validation to newer faiths. Others champion the idea of fusion, where different cultural and religious streams genuinely blended. This perspective sees the Sibylline oracles as a vibrant tapestry, where Jewish and Christian threads were skillfully interwoven with older pagan patterns. It speaks to a dynamic interplay of ideas across different cultures. However, the charge of forgery cannot be easily dismissed. Critics argued that later authors deliberately fabricated texts, attributing them to the weight of ancient Sibylline authority to lend their own messages credibility. This raises questions about authenticity and intent. Understanding which of these categories best describes different sections of the oracles is key to comprehending their influence, particularly how figures like Augustine grappled with these pagan prophets. Few figures in Christian history are as influential as Augustine of Hippo, and his engagement with the Sibylline oracles reveals profound theological tension. Here was a revered church father, wrestling with texts that were demonstrably pagan in origin, yet seemed to echo Christian truth. Augustine, ever the intellectual, recognized the power these oracles held in the broader Roman world. He couldn't simply dismiss them, especially given the evident Christian interpolations. How could he reconcile these seemingly divine pronouncements from a non-Christian source with orthodox Christian theology? He navigated this complex landscape by arguing for a limited, perhaps even unwitting, divine inspiration for some of the Sibyls. He suggested that God, in his infinite wisdom, could use even pagan voices to prepare the way for truth. This provided a framework for Christians to engage with, rather than outright reject, these ancient prophecies. His intellectual wrestling highlights the challenge these texts pose to early Christian thinkers, forcing them to consider the boundaries of divine revelation. Yet even as Augustine offered a nuanced perspective, the sheer number and disparate nature of the Sibylline books presented another challenge, which we'll address in The Numbered Books No One Agrees On. One of the most perplexing aspects of the Sibylline oracles is their sheer number and disorganized nature. We speak of the Sibylline oracles as a single entity, but in reality, they are a collection of distinct books, often numbered from I to XIV or even more, depending on the compilation. The problem is, these numbers aren't always consistent. Different scholarly traditions and ancient editions present varying arrangements, omissions, and even renumberings. Imagine trying to assemble a puzzle where some pieces are missing, others are duplicates, and the box lid shows a different picture entirely. This fluidity makes a definitive reconstruction incredibly difficult. It hints at a dynamic textual tradition where new material was constantly being added, redacted, and reorganized over many centuries. The lack of a stable, universally accepted canon is a distinguishing feature. This textual chaos complicates any attempt to trace a linear historical development or a single, unifying theological message within the oracles. This disunity, however, didn't stop them from articulating surprisingly consistent anti-imperial sentiments, a theme we'll delve into next. Anti-imperial underpinnings. Despite their origins in pagan Rome and their later appropriation by various groups, a recurring theme within the Sibylline oracles is a surprisingly strong anti-imperial sentiment. These texts frequently voiced criticism, warnings, and even dire prophecies against dominant empires. Whether directed against the excesses of Roman power, the cruelty of Hellenistic rulers, or other oppressive regimes, the Sibyls often spoke truth to power. They condemned corruption, violence, and the arrogance of rulers who believed themselves beyond divine judgment. This was dangerous territory. Imagine the courage it took for an author to subtly, or not so subtly, critique the ruling empire through the voice of a revered prophetess. These weren't just abstract philosophical complaints. They were prophecies of impending doom and divine retribution for imperial transgressions. This anti-establishment stance is a thread that runs through many of the disparate books. It reveals a subversive undercurrent beneath their seemingly orthodox facade, showing how prophecy could become a powerful tool for social and political commentary. This critical lens finds fascinating parallels, especially when we examine their echoes in the Book of Revelation. The prophetic spirit of the Sibylline oracles surprisingly finds strong echoes in one of the most famous apocalyptic texts. The Book of Revelation. The imagery, language, and rhetorical style often bear striking resemblances. It's hard to ignore the common threads. Both bodies of work employ vivid, often grotesque, symbolic language to depict cataclysmic events, cosmic judgments, and the ultimate triumph of good over evil. Dragons, beasts, fallen stars, and universal conflagrations populate their respective visions. This was the common currency of apocalyptic thought. Scholars have long debated whether Revelation directly borrowed from the Sibylline tradition, or if both texts simply drew from a shared pool of Greco-Roman apocalyptic tropes. Regardless, the parallels are too numerous to be mere coincidence, suggesting a deep cultural resonance. Understanding these echoes helps us appreciate the broader prophetic landscape of the ancient world, revealing how ideas circulated and mutated across religious boundaries. However, another crucial element often overlooked in these prophecies is the radical role of gender and the prophetic voice. At the heart of the Sibylline oracles lies a fascinating paradox. Powerful prophecies delivered overwhelmingly by female voices in a patriarchal world. The very figure of the Sibyl, a woman touched by divine ecstasy, challenges conventional gender roles of antiquity. These prophetesses, revered and feared, wielded immense spiritual authority. They were not confined to the domestic sphere. Their pronouncements shaped public life, influenced emperors, and even initiated cultic practices. Their words transcended their gender. This emphasis on the female prophetic voice offers a unique lens into ancient religious expression, suggesting a space where gender could be transcended by divine inspiration. It also raises questions about the societal implications of such powerful female figures. How did their roles influence or even challenge the established hierarchies? The prominence of female prophets within the oracles adds another layer of complexity to their interpretation, making them more than just religious texts. They become a window into the nuanced understanding of divine authority in the ancient world, especially when wrapped in pagan wrappings, monotheistic core. The unique character of the Sibylline oracles lies in their pagan wrappings, concealing a surprising monotheistic core. They originated in a polytheistic Roman world, yet became powerful vehicles for the propagation of one God. This blend is truly fascinating. Imagine the striking visual, a prophetess steeped in polytheistic ritual suddenly declaring the coming of a single, all-powerful creator God. These were not just subtle hints. They were often explicit pronouncements that would have resonated powerfully in diverse religious landscapes. The familiar form provided comfort, while the content delivered a radical message. This duality allowed the oracles to bridge cultural divides, making monotheistic concepts accessible to audiences familiar with pagan prophetic traditions. It wasn't about erasing the old, but about transforming it from within, offering a new perspective through a trusted voice. This intentional appropriation and repurposing of pagan forms for monotheistic ends was a brilliant strategy, ensuring the oracle's survival and widespread influence. Yet, despite their adaptability, many of these texts were forbidden and forgotten. Despite their immense popularity and influence, many of the Sibylline oracles ultimately faced the fate of being forbidden and forgotten. As the Christian Church consolidated its power and defined its own canon, these external prophecies became highly suspicious. Imagine the Church Fathers striving for theological purity, encountering texts that blended pagan, Jewish, and Christian elements in often contradictory ways. They had to draw a line to distinguish between canonical scripture and what they deemed spurious or dangerous. The oracles, with their fluid nature, often fell on the wrong side of that line. Their diverse origins and sometimes explicit critical stance against established powers made them a liability. They were seen as potentially leading believers astray, blurring the lines of true doctrine. The very flexibility that had allowed them to flourish eventually became their downfall. This suppression, however, wasn't absolute. Fragments and references survived, hinting at a much richer and more expansive prophetic tradition that was nearly erased. The struggle to control these narratives transformed them into theological weapons across empires. The Sibylline oracles often functioned as theological weapons across empires, wielded by different groups to validate their claims and undermine their rivals. Their reputation for ancient wisdom made them powerful instruments in ideological conflicts. Imagine Christian apologists quoting Sibylline verses to prove to pagan audiences that their own prophets foretold Christ, or Jewish communities using them to articulate their messianic hopes and critiques of Roman rule. These weren't just static texts, they were active participants in the intellectual and religious battles of the day. Emperors, too, might selectively endorse or suppress certain Sibylline passages to bolster their own authority or discredit opponents. The ability to claim ancient prophetic backing was a potent political tool, shifting the balance of power. The fluidity of the texts made them particularly susceptible to such manipulation. This strategic deployment demonstrates how deeply intertwined prophecy was with political and religious authority in the ancient world. The stakes were incredibly high, fueled by an underlying apocalyptic hunger. The enduring appeal of the Sibylline oracles, particularly their more dramatic sections, points to a deep and pervasive apocalyptic hunger in the ancient world. People craved explanations for suffering, predictions of ultimate justice, and visions of a new, purified age. Imagine a world riddled with instability, war, disease, and political upheaval. In such times, the idea of a cosmic plan, a divine intervention that would right all wrongs, offered immense comfort and hope. The Sibyl's pronouncements tapped directly into this profound yearning. Their prophecies of judgment, destruction, and subsequent renewal provided a framework for understanding chaos and believing in a brighter future. It wasn't always a comforting message. Often it promised immense suffering before the ultimate triumph, but it offered meaning. This hunger for apocalyptic narratives transcended religious boundaries, illustrating a universal human need to make sense of a turbulent world. Yet this very hunger, coupled with their fluid nature, threatened a canonical collapse. The very existence and proliferation of the Sibylline oracles presented a challenge that, for a time, risked canonical collapse for early Jewish and Christian traditions. When everyone is claiming ancient prophecy, how do you define what is truly sacred? Imagine the difficulty of establishing a fixed body of scripture when new, Sibylline material, sometimes contradictory, was constantly emerging and gaining traction. This posed a serious threat to the authority and integrity of what would become the Old and New Testaments. How do you distinguish a true prophet from a clever impostor? The church councils and rabbinical authorities grappled with this problem, eventually drawing clear lines around their respective canons. They had to decide which texts were divinely inspired and which were merely human compositions, however influential. The Sibylline oracles largely fell outside these boundaries. This process of canonical discernment was a crucial moment in religious history, highlighting the inherent tension between established tradition and dynamic, evolving prophecy. Yet, despite their official exclusion, their impact lingers. What's left now in what still waits in the Sibylline silence? Even after centuries of suppression and neglect, the Sibylline oracles continue to speak to us, posing the question: what still waits in the Sibylline silence? Their fragmented texts offer glimpses into a rich and complex spiritual landscape that often challenges our preconceived notions. Imagine diving into those ancient verses, uncovering not just archaic prophecies, but a vibrant dialogue between cultures, a struggle for meaning, and a persistent human yearning for divine guidance. They remind us that the boundaries of faith and prophecy were once far more fluid than we often imagine. These forgotten voices prompt us to reconsider the origins of many foundational religious ideas and the diverse ways in which divine revelation was once perceived. They stand as a testament to the power of prophecy to transcend time and tradition. Make sure to subscribe for more religious videos and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video. We'll see you in the next one.